I used to believe Thanksgiving was the one day of the year that still felt safe, a day where family tension hid under polite smiles and everyone pretended we were still whole. But last year, that illusion shattered the moment I stepped through my parents' front door with my kids. I didn't notice the warning signs at first, the too long glances, the forced cheerfulness, the way my children stiffened beside me. I just kept telling myself we could survive one meal, one holiday, one fragile attempt at normal. I had no idea they had planned something else entirely. Before dinner was even served, I watched my kids' faces crumble in a way I had never seen before. Something inside them broke, and something inside me awakened. A cold, sharp clarity. A realization that the people I trusted to love my children had crossed a line I never imagined they'd even approach. By the time the night was over, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the certainty that I could never let this go. Not this time. Not when it was my children who paid the price for someone else's cruelty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply walked out with my kids, promising myself that the next time they saw me, they would understand exactly what they had done. Because I had a plan. And trust me, when it unfolded, it changed everything. Do you want to know what pushed me to a level of revenge I never thought I was capable of? Before everything fell apart, my life felt steady in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I was a single mom of two, busy, tired most days, stretched thin between work and parenting, but there was a peaceful rhythm to our little world. Our mornings were chaotic but warm, filled with mismatched socks, burnt toast, and my kids' laughter echoing down the hallway. Evenings were softer, usually ending with all three of us squeezed on the couch, watching the same shows we'd seen countless times, but somehow never grew tired of. I loved that simplicity. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I worked from home as a freelance designer, juggling clients while my kids were at school. It wasn't the job I once dreamed of, but it gave me something more valuable: time with my children, freedom to build a life that wasn't dictated by anyone else. And after everything I'd been through in my marriage, that freedom mattered. My parents were part of that stability too, or at least that's what I told myself. They weren't perfect, but I believed they cared. They lived just an hour away, close enough to visit occasionally, but far enough that our lives didn't constantly overlap. My kids adored their grandparents, or maybe they adored the idea of them, the way children sometimes do. And I encouraged it. I wanted them to have family connections I never quite felt growing up. But even then, there were cracks I ignored. The small criticisms dressed up as advice. The subtle favoritism toward my younger sister, as if I had always been the one who fell just short of their expectations. Whenever they hinted that I should do things differently, parent differently, live differently, I brushed it off. I told myself they meant well, that they weren't trying to undermine me. It was easier to believe that than confront the truth. Still, there were moments I couldn't shake. Times when my parents acted like my children were accessories they could pick up and put down whenever it suited them. Times when they would make promises and forget them, leaving my kids confused and disappointed. It bothered me more than I admitted. But with the holidays coming, I pushed it aside. I convinced myself that Thanksgiving would be fine, that it always was. My kids were excited. They had spent days making little handprint turkeys at school and practicing the thankful list their teachers helped them write. They packed their things the night before as if we were going on a grand adventure instead of a simple family dinner. Their energy made me hopeful that maybe this year would be different, that maybe my parents would show up as the grandparents my children deserved. I tried to visualize the day ahead: a crowded table, clumsy laughs, my dad carving the turkey, my mom fussing over the sides. Maybe it wouldn't fix our complicated history, but it could at least give my kids a memory worth keeping. I held on to that image tightly, like something fragile that needed both hands to keep from slipping. But in the back of my mind, a quiet doubt lingered, a sense that something was off. My parents' recent tone during phone calls felt strained. Too enthusiastic in places, too dismissive in others. Even my sister seemed unusually cheerful when we spoke, like she knew something I didn't. I chalked it up to holiday stress, family dynamics, anything except a real reason to worry. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle but unmistakable. A feeling in my gut I kept pushing away because I wanted this holiday to work. I wanted my children to feel loved by everyone in their family, not just me. And maybe, if I'm honest, I wanted to prove to myself that the distance between me and my parents wasn't as deep as it sometimes felt. But the truth was waiting for us, simmering quietly beneath the surface like something ready to boil over the moment we arrived. I didn't know then that Thanksgiving would become the day everything changed. The day my trust in my parents would finally crack. The day my children would learn a painful lesson far earlier than they should have. And the day I would realize that even the calmest life can collapse in a moment, pushing you down a path you never expected to take. A path that, for me, led straight to revenge. Thanksgiving morning started off deceptively normal. The kids woke up buzzing with the kind of excitement only holidays can bring, running around the house in their little sweaters while I tried to get everyone ready. I remember looking at them, bright-eyed, hopeful, and feeling a quiet swell of pride. They deserved a good day. They deserved a family who would show up for them. I packed the car with the dishes I'd made, wrapped in towels to keep them warm. My daughter buckled her favorite stuffed rabbit into the seat beside her. My son carried the picture he'd drawn for my parents, a lopsided family standing around a giant turkey. He held it carefully by the edges, afraid to bend it. That detail still sits in my memory, like a bruise. The drive was smooth, the weather unusually warm for late November. But tucked beneath the calm road and the quiet chatter from the back seat, a knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't fear, just an uneasy awareness I couldn't shake. Something about the day felt rehearsed. And not by me. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, everything looked the same as it always had. Same wreath on the door, same over-decorated porch, same smell of roasted turkey drifting out the front window. My kids tumbled out of the car, running toward the steps. My mom opened the door before I even made it halfway up the walkway, her smile wide and strangely static, like it had been plastered onto her face a second too early. Come in, she said, ushering the children inside. They rushed past her, eager to show her their projects from school. She barely glanced at them before glancing at me, just a quick flick of the eyes, sharp and assessing. The kind of look she'd always given me when she was expecting something from me, usually something I didn't know I had failed to do. Inside, the house felt off. Not messy, not chaotic, just staged. My sister was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll on her phone, but clearly waiting for something. She greeted my children only after a noticeable delay, her tone too sweet, too careful. Even my dad seemed oddly stiff, his voice unusually cheerful as he offered the kids drinks before they'd even taken off their coats. It took me less than a minute to realize we weren't guests, we were props. Still, I tried to shake it off. Holidays make people act weird, I told myself. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe everything really was fine. But then the first small cut came. My daughter proudly showed my mom the little, thankful list she'd written at school. Messy handwriting, backward letters, but full of love. My mom took it, skimmed it, and offered a polite nod before handing it back. That's nice, she said, already turning toward the kitchen. No hug, no praise, nothing that acknowledged the effort my daughter had put into it. My kid's shoulders slumped, but she said nothing. She rarely did. She took after me that way. Next came my son's drawing. He held it out to my dad with both hands. My dad didn't even look at it. He simply said, "Put it over there," gesturing vaguely toward the counter where mail and coupons had piled up. It landed face down. Something cracked quietly inside me. Still, I bit my tongue. I reminded myself that my kids were watching, that I couldn't let a few rude moments ruin the day. I kept my smile thin but present, trying to hold everything together. But the truth had only just begun to reveal itself. The first real sign came during dinner prep. My sister kept hovering around my kids, but not in a loving or playful way. She watched them closely, almost nervously, as though waiting for them to do something wrong. My son asked if he could help set the table, and she immediately stepped in front of him. "Maybe don't touch anything. It's expensive." It wasn't. My parents still used the same dishes they'd bought from a budget store a decade ago. My daughter quietly drifted toward me, clinging to the hem of my sweater. She always did that when she felt uncomfortable. I bent down, smoothing her hair, whispering that everything was okay. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning of the unraveling. When dinner was finally ready, everyone moved toward the table. Seats were arranged, places set, but something was wrong. My kids' seats were at the far end, away from me, squeezed between my parents and my sister like afterthoughts. I reached out to pull up chairs beside me, but my mother stopped me with a single raised eyebrow. "We already set the table," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. I sat down slowly, watching as my children were positioned like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. They exchanged uneasy glances, but stayed quiet. Then it happened. As the meal began, the conversation shifted to a topic that hit like a punch I never saw coming: my supposed failures as a parent. My mom brought it up casually, slicing the turkey as if she were commenting on the weather. "It must be hard, raising them alone," she said, loud enough for the whole table. My fork froze midway to my mouth. My sister chimed in next, adding her usual brand of passive-aggressive sweetness. "I mean, they just need more structure. Kids act out when they don't have the right guidance." My kids weren't acting out. They were sitting politely, barely touching their food, trying to make themselves invisible. My father, who rarely got involved in anything emotional, took a sip of his drink and added, "It's a shame they don't get the discipline they need." You can tell. The room spun. My kids looked at me, confused, embarrassed, hurt. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own breath. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't a concern. This was an ambush. It got worse. My mother leaned toward my daughter and said, "She gets overwhelmed, doesn't she? Your mom? She tries, but she struggles." My daughter's lower lip trembled. My son stared at his plate, fists clenched. I wanted to grab both of them and leave right then, but I couldn't move. Shock pinned me in place. I had known my parents didn't approve of my choices. But to humiliate my children? To use them as tools to shame me? Then came the breaking point. My mother picked up my son's drawing, his carefully made Thanksgiving picture, and held it up between two fingers like something fragile she didn't actually want to touch. "This," she said, "is why they need more guidance. This kind of messy, unfocused work, it's a reflection of the environment they're in." She tossed it onto the table. It landed right in front of my son. He didn't cry. He just stared at it, the color draining from his face. And in that moment, something inside me, something I had tried to bury for years, rose to the surface. Rage. Not loud, explosive rage. Cold. Controlled. Surgical. My mother turned back to the turkey, unaware she had just crossed the one line I would never allow anyone to cross, humiliating my children. I stood up. Everyone froze. My voice was calm when I spoke, too calm. The kind of calm that makes people nervous without knowing why. "I think we're done here." My parents exchanged glances, confused but still perched on their high moral ground. My sister opened her mouth like she wanted to add something cruel, but something in my expression must have stopped her, because she closed it again. I collected my kids silently. They stood quickly, grateful to leave. No one tried to stop us. No one apologized. They watched us walk out of the house, as if we were an inconvenience finally being removed. When we got into the car, my son whispered, "Did we do something wrong?" My throat tightened. "No," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." But in that moment, I knew something with bone-deep certainty. They would never hurt my children again. Not with words. Not with judgment. Not with their cruel little expectations disguised as concern. By the time I backed out of the driveway, my mind was already calculating, analyzing, plotting. Not impulsive revenge. Not reckless anger. Something smarter. Something precise. Something they wouldn't see coming until it was already happening. They thought they had humiliated my children to prove a point. But they had miscalculated. Because they hadn't just insulted my parenting, they had awakened a version of me I didn't even know existed. A version who wasn't afraid to take everything they valued. A version who knew exactly where to hurt them, not physically, but in the ways that would leave lasting scars on their pride. And so, as we drove home in silence, my children leaning against each other in the back seat, something inside me sharpened into resolve. They had crossed a line. Now it was my turn. And the revenge I was planning? It would unravel their carefully curated image piece by piece, starting with something so small they wouldn't even realize it was happening, until it was too late. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, I became someone I barely recognized, focused, relentless, sharper than I had ever allowed myself to be. My parents had always cared more about their reputation than anything else. Their carefully polished image, perfect family, perfect home, perfect values, held more weight to them than the feelings of their own grandchildren. I knew that if I was going to deliver a revenge that mattered, it had to hit them exactly where it hurt. And the opportunity came faster than I expected. My parents were hosting the annual neighborhood charity event, the one they bragged about year-round. The one where they played the role of benevolent pillars of the community, collecting donations and shaking hands while pretending generosity was in their nature and not just a way to polish their status. Everyone was going to be there. The town council, my dad's business partners, the country club crowd my mother adored, even local reporters who always captured photos of my parents for the community newsletter. I hadn't planned to attend, but when I saw the announcement online, the smiling photo of my parents beside a caption praising their dedication to family values, something inside me clicked. Family values. Of all things to pretend they upheld. That was the day I stopped thinking about revenge and started acting on it. For years, my parents had used their spotless reputation to excuse their behavior. They dismissed concerns, minimized problems, and pretended any tension was my fault. And behind closed doors, they belittled my parenting, judged my financial struggles, and treated my children like burdens. The world saw them as saints. I saw an opportunity. In the 2 weeks leading up to the event, I gathered everything I needed: screenshots, messages, notes from teachers recalling missed promises, pictures of the drawings and lists my kids brought to Thanksgiving that were ignored or tossed aside. I even requested copies of the school counselor's email describing how my son had withdrawn into himself after the holiday. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't manipulate. I simply collected the truth I had stayed silent about for years. Then, I created an anonymous digital packet. Clean, organized, time-stamped, impossible to dismiss. I waited until the night of the charity event. The venue was exactly what I expected: warm lighting, expensive centerpieces, people laughing too loudly in clothes they'd only wear once. My parents were at the front, greeting guests as they arrived, smiling as though the universe revolved around them. I stood outside for a moment with my kids beside me. They didn't know the full extent of what I was doing, and they didn't need to. They only knew we were here to finally be heard, as I told them. Inside, conversations quieted when people saw us. My mother's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to see it. She wasn't expecting me. Perfect. I walked straight toward them, my kids at my sides, holding their hands tightly. I made sure everyone saw us. I made sure every camera in the room could catch my parents' reaction. My father stiffened first. My sister, standing behind them, turned pale. The crowd's curiosity grew like a ripple. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to confront, far enough not to appear aggressive. The room was so quiet I could hear my son's uneven breathing beside me. And then, with a calmness I did not feel, I said 5 words that cracked the night open. "Would you like to explain?" My mother blinked, startled. "Explain what?" she asked, still clinging to the last threads of composure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of neatly printed photographs, the ones of my kids' holiday drawings, the thankful lists, the messages. I placed them gently on the nearest table, one by one, letting the crowd see. People moved closer, whispering. My parents stood frozen. I spoke clearly, my voice steady. "This is how you treated your grandchildren on Thanksgiving, the ones you claim to adore. The ones you use as props for your reputation. My mother's hand flew to her chest. This is not appropriate. Neither was humiliating my children in front of a table full of people, I replied. Whispers turned into murmurs. Phones lifted. Eyes widened. If my parents wanted a public image, they had one now, raw and unfiltered. I continued, still calm, still controlled. You insulted their work. You dismissed their feelings. You used them to attack me, and you broke their trust. But outside this house. I gestured around the room. You pretend to be the perfect grandparents. Perfect hosts. Perfect people. My father stepped forward, voice low. We can talk about this privately. We tried that, I said. You had your chance. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out the envelope. Copies of the school counselor's notes about my children's emotional withdrawal after the holiday. I placed it on top of the pile. The whispers turned to gasps. My parents' image, the thing they loved most, was unraveling in real time. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to make sure you never get to pretend again. You don't get to smile for cameras while treating my kids like they're disposable. My kids pressed closer to me. I felt their small hands gripping mine, grounding me. Then I delivered the final blow. We're done, I said quietly but firmly. You are no longer part of our lives. And if anyone here wants to know why this, I gestured to the table of evidence, is why. The room was silent. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father looked at the crowd, seeing their judgment for the first time. My sister looked like she wanted to disappear. And then I turned. I didn't wait for their excuses, their attempts to salvage their reputation, their guilt-tripped pleas. I simply walked away with my children, leaving them standing under the warm lights they had always loved but suddenly seemed too harsh, too revealing. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt something shift inside me, not relief, not joy, but a powerful, steady certainty. This was the turning point. The moment they realized they couldn't control the narrative anymore. The moment the truth finally outshined their image. And as the doors behind us closed, muffling the echoes of shocked whispers and unraveling facades, one thought settled in my mind with absolute clarity. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about freeing us. But what came afterward, that was something none of us saw coming. In the days after the charity event, I felt a kind of stillness I hadn't experienced in years. Not peace. Peace comes slowly, in layers, but a quiet clarity, like the world had stopped spinning just long enough for me to breathe again. The truth was finally out in the open. My parents could no longer hide behind polite smiles or carefully crafted holiday photos. For the first time, the world saw them the way I had always seen them. Flawed, fallible, and far from the perfect image they tried to project. But what surprised me most was what happened inside my home. My children changed. Not in ways that frightened me, but in ways that caught me off guard. My son started talking more, really talking, about his feelings about Thanksgiving, about what had happened at the charity event. It took him days to work up the courage, but when he did, he admitted something that broke my heart. He thought he had caused the humiliation because his drawing wasn't good enough. I held him for a long time, whispering truths I wish I had told him earlier, that his art was beautiful, that his worth had nothing to do with perfection, and that adults can be wrong, deeply wrong, no matter how old or respected they are. My daughter became clingier at first, curling into my side every night, afraid I might disappear the way her trust in her grandparents had. But slowly, as days passed without harsh words or cold judgment, she relaxed. She began to laugh the way she used to, without hesitation, without fear of being shut down. They healed bit by bit, not because I had shielded them from pain, but because I had finally chosen us over the obligation to maintain a relationship that drained us. My parents, on the other hand, reacted exactly as I expected. They sent long, dramatic messages about being misunderstood. They insisted that I had taken things out of context. They blamed everything on the holidays, the stress, my supposed oversensitivity. When none of that worked, the tone shifted. Suddenly, I was the villain. I was the ungrateful daughter. I had embarrassed them. I had publicly humiliated them in front of important people. Not once, not a single time, did they apologize to my children. That told me everything. I blocked them. Not in anger, but in finality. Revenge had given me something I didn't realize I needed. Closure. Not the soft kind that comes with apologies and healing, but the sharp, definitive kind that comes when you realize the door was always meant to stay closed. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the noise faded. Their friends stopped whispering. The community moved on. My parents' reputation never fully recovered, but that wasn't my concern anymore. What mattered was that my children no longer had to shape themselves around people who made them feel small. When spring arrived, I took my kids to the park, the same park my parents used to boast about taking them to. My son ran ahead, chasing the wind, while my daughter held my hand, her tiny fingers warm in mine. Watching them laugh under the open sky, I realized something that struck me with quiet force. Revenge hadn't hardened me. It freed me. Freed me from years of guilt that wasn't mine. Freed me from expectations that were never fair. Freed me from believing that blood alone makes family. But freedom doesn't come without reflection. There were nights when I wondered if I had gone too far. If exposing everything so publicly had been necessary. If there was a kinder path I could have taken. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered my son's lowered eyes as his drawing was mocked. I remembered my daughter's trembling lip as she tried to understand why her grandmother had dismissed her list. I remembered the cold, calculated humiliation my parents inflicted on children who only wanted to be loved. Justice isn't always soft. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's public. Sometimes it's the only way to make people see the harm they've done. My children deserved protection, not silence. And I deserved liberation, not obligation. What surprised me most was how many people reached out after that night. Parents from my kids' school, neighbors, even former friends of my parents who said things like, "I always sensed something was off," or "I'm glad someone finally spoke up." It made me realize how often we all stay quiet to keep the peace, even when the silence is the very thing that breaks us. Revenge, in my case, wasn't born from hatred. It was born from clarity. From finally understanding that forgiveness can exist where accountability never lived. Months later, as life settled again, my kids and I created a new Thanksgiving tradition. We cooked together, danced in the kitchen, spilled gravy twice, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. There was no tension, no quiet judgment, no fragile attempts at pretending everything was fine. Just us. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Sometimes revenge is dramatic. Sometimes it's explosive. But sometimes, maybe the most meaningful times, it's simply choosing a better future and shutting the door on the past that tried to hold you down. I don't regret what I did. Not because it punished my parents, but because it healed my children. And at the end of the day, that's what mattered. So if you've ever been betrayed by the people you were taught to trust, if you've ever swallowed pain just to keep a relationship afloat, if you've ever watched someone hurt your family and felt powerless to stop it, let me ask you this. At what point does protecting your peace become more important than protecting someone else's image?